Tom, thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us today on 10 Across Conversations.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
And we'll talk about how busy you've been lately, maybe towards the end of this discussion. But I want to let our listeners know why we instigated this call and wanted to get your perspective on all things Arizona. Um, First of all, I think a number of us noted your editorial in the New York Times with the title, "Don't Abandon the American Southwest Just Yet." And I know there's been a fair amount of discussion about that in the state and elsewhere. And I think what you're trying to indicate is that if you follow Arizona or Phoenix or the Southwest, there are a lot of things that come to mind immediately based on papers like the New York Times. We don't have enough water. It's really hot. And why are people moving here? So tell us what prompted you. I know you have a book, which we're going to talk about too, Rim to River, of which this is a sort of excerpt from that. But tell us what prompted you to write this editorial.
Sure. I mean, listeners will remember that the summer of 2023 was particularly brutal in the Southwest. Phoenix had a July of consistently high temperatures. It was very difficult to be in the valley during that time. And this inspired a wave of apocalyptic journalism and opinion pieces suggesting that we're going to have an unlivable Southwest. Phoenix has labored under this impression for many years that it is, as an author put it, the least sustainable city in the United States because of the urban heat islands, because of stresses on the Colorado River, because of the hasty way that many of its exurbs were built. And an editor at the New York Times climate desk contacted me and said, "What do you think of this? Is this on the money?" And I said, "Well, climate change is real, and this is no joke. However, what's missing from these forecasts, and missing somewhat from the models, is the X factor of adaptability, of what people here are going to do to roll with the punches, so to speak. And there's any number of tools in the toolbox that can keep the sustainability of the Southwest. And that really needs to be a part of the conversation."
And you're relatively clear-eyed about that. And let's go into your history as to how well you know Arizona, because they're talking to someone, this New York Times editor, with someone who's lived in the state his entire life and has an interesting perspective on that. Give us a little bit of your background.
Sure. My great-great-grandfather moved to the Phoenix Valley in 1905 to practice medicine in Arizona Territory, and found that there was a glut of doctors. You'd think that there'd be a great need for country physicians at the time, but he had a hard time finding patients. So he turned to what the hot go-go thing was at the time, which was cotton farming. You could make an enormous amount of money on this crop, and even more so during the buildup to World War I. It was an indispensable product for warfighting, for building the tires of military vehicles, for the wings of biplanes that we were stamping out of our factories. Famously, the Goodyear Tire Company came and was growing enormous amounts of cotton in the West Valley. My great granddad got in on the action, and perhaps another example of Southwestern adaptability to grow this high moisture crop in the Upper Sonoran Desert.
So weirdly enough, we're connected in that I'm from Akron, Ohio, which is the home of the rubber industry. So the Goodyears, the Goodriches, the Firestones, all had an interest in cotton going out here, and why we have Goodyear, Arizona, and other places that draw their names, Litchfield, from the Akron area.
It put an enormous stamp on Arizona, a physical legacy that's still visible, even to motorists who can look out the sides of the windows when they're driving through central Arizona and see the ghosts of the old furrows.
Right.
See how the extent of that crop, which has shrunk greatly. And this is part of one of my arguments about the adaptability of Arizona for moving forward in an era of climate change. And this comes from, the descendant of proud cotton farmers. It may be time to rethink cotton. It may be time to shrink its footprint even further.
And as you point out in your writings in the editorial and in your book, Rim to River, might be time to think about agriculture writ large. But before we get to that point, in your book, you travel the state, north to south, on an incredible hike, if you will, in an effort to try to understand a place that you obviously have known your entire life, but which still remains sort of an enigma. You describe at several points in the book, looking out over Phoenix or wherever it is, in a way, how did this come to be? And how much of it is really real? And so, in spite of your having lived here all your life, why is it that you find this place so difficult to describe either to yourself and or to others?
Sure. I mean, we all have a relationship with the place that we live. And I think Arizona presents a particularly difficult foundation for a relationship for a couple of reasons. The first is the far-flung built environment. All American cities rest on the foundation of the automobile and on the detached suburban ranch home. But this is especially true in Phoenix. We almost invented the lifestyle. It was actually called the Phoenix model of development of
Hmm.
master planned communities,
Hmm.
of wide arterial streets, of shopping centers on the corner built in an L shape. And on that detached ranch home, often built in a production style, that is to say, mass produced.
Hmm.
So these are the civic underpinnings of our major metropolitan areas here, and they're not necessarily conducive for building healthy communities.
Right.
We have a real estate foundation to our economy. We have had that since the end of World War II. We like newcomers. We encourage them.
Hmm.
It's a wonderful, friendly place that used to be that you could move here on a single income and achieve home ownership
Hmm.
fairly easily, fairly quickly, even with a working class job and a high school degree. Um, it's a wonderful thing in that sense. It does come with some costs, and
Right.
that includes a sense of transience, a lack of continuity in the consciousness of those who live here, and a loneliness that's sewn into the civic garment. And I'm not just making this up. There's
Right.
a lot of social surveys that indicate a low level of trust among Arizonans for their neighbors, and this is due in large part to a newcomers and B, the kind of built environments where you really have to make an effort to build that community.
And there are some quotes in your book from people in the real estate industry or land sales or others, many of which you and I both know well, who actually admit to this and say it isn't a conducive built environment for quality social interaction, which is interesting in that we just held a 10 Across Summit in Los Angeles, and we had the founder of Cul-de-sac in one of our panels. Cul-de-sac being a community that's being built here absent of cars, very different than anything else in Arizona. And we were just there to interview some people, and several of the residents said, yeah, I've lived in other places. I didn't know anybody around me. Cul-de-sac has been built on first community and then the built environment, which is very different. And you could tell that people really appreciated that. But it's very easy because this place is a function of the automobile, production housing, highways, and I suppose the air conditioner, which you have to go inside your house to enjoy. It's not conducive to the kind of conversations you might have imagined in other environments where you had a front porch, which you often don't hear.
The vernacular is oriented towards privacy. As you note, the book is about my walk across Arizona, 790 miles of it.
Yes.
But interspersed throughout are 17 essays about various aspects of this state: the food, the music, the politics, the
Hmm.
copper mining, the water, the wildfires. And among them is an exploration of these production home suburbs, and
Hmm.
they just are relentless. They don't seem to stop, and it's easy to again look down your nose as a social critic and bemoan this development. But I did want to take it seriously and also note
Hmm.
that there is a good aspect to this. These suburbs can be very diverse. For instance, a lot of people, a lot of migrants from the global south are buying homes in places like Gilbert, Queen Creek, Santan Valley. For this story, I went and spent some time in a place called Rancho Mercado, an entirely made up name of a new master plan community on the edge of Surprise, Arizona, one of the real boombergs in our state, fifth fastest growing city in America. It's going to be bigger than Des Moines, Iowa, pretty soon. And this is 37 miles from downtown Phoenix. And within this Rancho Mercado of new homes, I talked to a number of people who say, yeah, I keep waiting for um, a chance to get to know my neighbor. It never happens. People disappear into their
Hmm.
garages at the end of the day, and the garage closes. And anyway, while I was out there at 10 a.m. on a Sunday morning, just kind of walking around with a hopefully pleasant expression on my face and a smile, and just went over to greet someone, and she sticks her hand out in a foreboding way, and indicates don't talk to me, and then gets on her
Right.
phone and calls actually 911 um, to report like there's a stranger approaching me, and it was a really disconcerting experience. I was horrified that this was happening, and I left immediately. Didn't want to have any encounter with the Surprise Police Department over the apparently grave misdemeanor of smiling and attempting to talk with a stranger. Um, and if that's the kind of way that there's an instant suspicion in these places, um, that doesn't speak well. That doesn't augur well for community formation.
So you make the connection. Maybe I'm going to make it more explicitly here than I should. One might say, Tom, yeah, that's true in these communities. And by the way, maybe what that produces is the strange sort of politics that we have in the state that you devote quite a bit of attention to in the book, even though it's about your hike across the state. You stop in these chapters and get into all kinds of things that obviously exceed the bounds of the hike. So, do you think there's a connection between the suspicion you just described now and earlier on in this conversation, you mentioned this is a place of newcomers. It's transient, which, if you wanted to have politics that could sort of import all kinds of things and create different kinds of perspectives, this would be the place to do it. Tell us about the political leanings of the state and maybe connected to the built environment that fosters some of that.
Sure. One of the chapters in this book is a history of the Arizona Republican Party. And I wanted to do this really thoughtfully. I didn't want to take any cheap shots. I mean, certainly it's a subject of national circus. Some of the things that happen in the Arizona legislature are audit done at the behest of Donald Trump was a complete waste of money and a really dismal exercise. Certainly, the hijinks within the party leadership in Arizona have been discomforting to many Arizona Republicans. I come from
Mhm.
a Republican family in that sense. And so I wanted to take this seriously and trace the origins of this brand of lonely, angry, screen driven politics, which, we share this with the rest of the nation. We're certainly not in isolation, but I
Hmm.
make the argument that it began to happen here first.
Hmm.
In a rough analogy, the same way that the U.S. Civil War of the 19th century was being fought out and tested, if you like, in Kansas, Bleeding Kansas in the 1850s. I think you saw the bellicosity and the suspicion and the anger brewing here as late as 15 years ago. Um, I argued in a previous book that the attempted assassination of Gabrielle Giffords um, was made possible by a confluence of social factors. in Arizona. That this was not I mean, it was one disturbed individual. Let's be clear,
Right.
uh, but that disturbed individual came from a context. It was not out of
Hmm.
nowhere.
Hmm.
Uh, so too is some of the more regrettable elements of our politics. That's also in context,
Hmm.
and it comes from certainly newcomers. It comes from that retreat into the house, into the air-conditioned house,
Hmm.
and plunk down before screens. It comes from a kind of a desert libertarianism, of a sense of freedom
Hmm.
that drives the moving here for not everyone certainly, but that ideological romance is a part of motivations for coming to Arizona and developing a kind of 21st century cowboy light view of the world.
For someone who's as thoughtful as you are as an observer, as an historian, to suggest that something like the Gifford situation, which I'd like to come back to for just a second, because I know it's really an intimate story for you, to suggest that the context produced such an event. And as you point out, it was an individual making decisions on his own. But it's really hard to pin events to context. And people will deny that. No, 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 it's not that at all. As someone who writes about this, and you're pretty sure that the context is impactful because of your research, that must be difficult for you to manage.
Well, yeah, I mean, I certainly don't want to shut anyone up. There's profound free speech issues
Hmm.
involved here, and so it's not a
Hmm.
matter of you know uh, calling KTAR and telling them to stop broadcasting right wing paranoid content. No, but it is, I think, a matter of hopefully among some, even a small number of consumers of that kind of media to maybe be a little bit more aware of that it is a part of the civic fabric and
Right,
that it is not entirely healthy.
right. By the way, another connection between you and I, you mentioned you came from a Republican family. So did I in Ohio. I rode around on a Goldwater elephant in the 60s because my parents took me to a meeting of Barry Goldwater in downtown Canton, Ohio. Obviously, I think differently today, but I'll never forget that. And as you point out, someone like Barry Goldwater wouldn't fit in today's politics and actually was not ineffective. He was clearly effective as a leader and as a voice, but was interested in things that were outside the political realm. He had all kinds of other um, uh, uh, distractions. Let's put it that way. But things sort of began with Goldwater, didn't they, to get to this point?
Yes, Goldwater was a complicated person, a real mixed bag, and it's impossible to put some sort of Manichaean value
Hmm.
statement on
Hmm.
his enormous influence in Arizona. First of all, he was a tremendously affable individual,
Right.
without rancor towards those who disagreed with him. He ran against a Democratic Party machine in the 1954 Senate race. To everyone's surprise, won. This was just not done in Arizona, that we elected Republicans. And he floated on a carpet of charm,
Mm.
without managing to do a whole lot else. And
Hmm.
he admitted this himself. Goldwater
Yes.
um, confessed during the end of his career that the only thing of value that he ever did in the U.S. Senate was a Pentagon reorganization, which give him credit for that.
Yep.
But it was more a matter of style, and it was more a matter of one-liners
Hmm.
and of setting a certain tone and of bringing moxie and an attitude to conservatism, which famously was picked up by Ronald Reagan in 1980. George F. Will quipped that Goldwater had won in 1964. It just took 16 years to count the votes.
Hmm.
Um, I take the argument a little bit further and say that if you want to understand the Arizona Republican Party's love affair with Donald Trump, it really, really helps to watch the evolution of Barry Goldwater's journey in the 20th century with the state of
Right.
Arizona.
Right. And what's interesting, I found out this with John McCain. We're working to build his library and archives here at ASU. If you got to know him personally, also extremely affable, funny. and Hayden, Goldwater, McCain, obviously all involved with uh, the Pentagon, if you will, at the federal level, but also deeply in touch with the land here, whether it had to do with water and Hayden, or Goldwater's photography, or McCain's interested in the Rio Salado. Um, Complicated people all, but as politics have changed in the state, probably none would function the way they originally had.
I agree with that. And this fever is going to break at some point,
Hmm.
and it's going to take the reestablishment of kind of a pragmatism that we've lost. The Arizona legislature used to function very, very well up until about the late 1980s. There was a sense of non-ideological, non-blood sport approach to the job.
Hmm. Well, so let's apply pragmatism where it's really needed. Uh, let's talk about water for a minute. And in your book, Rim to River, you talk about how this journey across the state really changed your mind about water. I think you probably fully understood its importance, but you mentioned it in the same breath as how we need, let's say, gasoline to move around in our cars or other things. So tell us about the approach to something as existential as water that you see in our future. How are we going to wrap our heads around that?
Yeah, you mentioned anyone who wants to have a personal face-off with the elemental existential notion of water should really take a controlled and safe desert hike, but nonetheless one where you become aware of the critical need for water.
Controlled and safe, but I think one in which you lost 30 pounds.
Yeah,
If
yeah,
if
and one in
if you
which I
hike,
yeah, where you just get reminded over and over again of the probably what you learned in scouts. Treat the desert with profound respect.
right,
Don't mess around.
right.
The desert will beat you if you
Hmm.
if you
Hmm.
if you, if you get casual with it.
Hmm.
When it comes to water on a grand scale, I visited the highest point in Arizona, which is the top of Humphreys Peak. And I got to visit the lowest point in Arizona, 72 feet above sea level. It's where um, the Colorado River exits the United States near San
Hmm.
Luis. And Colorado River needs to be put as an asterisk because there's nothing left there. It's gone. We turned it off. We've uh, diverted it to the point where it doesn't exist. It's a sandy bed.
Right.
One of the more pathetic things you'll ever see. We've turned off the Verde. We've turned off the Gila. We've turned off the salt. Um, you know, this is necessary. I'm not um, going to sit here and bemoan this in some sort of medieval sense of sin. This is absolutely required for building cities, for growing crops, but we have reached a point where the notion of Arizona agriculture really needs to be thought through and triaged.
Well, this is the great dichotomy, right? I think some of the confidence, and again, I'm referring to your editorial in the Times where you say, "Yeah, I know it's crispy out here and we don't have a lot of water, but we've been inventive all along. The original inhabitants were engineers. We know how to do things. We know how to get the water where it needs to be." So your confidence in our ability to manage ourselves out here is derived on all this history, but it's the same history that turned all these water sources off, and you're suggesting maybe we've reached a critical point that we're not fully aware of as of yet.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's some resistance to creating groundwater management areas in
Hmm.
rural Arizona. I think that's got to change. I think we should never, ever, ever see a deal again like we did with the Fondamont Dairy out near Vicksburg, where we're growing grass to airlift it to Saudi Arabia. That's such a narrow economic interest that does
Right.
not benefit the general good. Um, I, the winter salad bowl, I should say, down
Right.
near Yuma, is an enormous driver of money and jobs. I'm not inclined to think that that's going to go away anytime soon. But some
Hmm.
of the more marginal efforts in non-red hot agricultural zones, um, pecans down in Cochise County,
Hmm.
cotton in Pinal County. I don't want it to go away forever. I don't want to create trauma for families that have been doing this for
Right.
generations. But hard questions need to be asked about sustainability. Hard questions need to be asked about whether certain dams should be allowed to stay up.
Hmm.
Almost from the minute in the 1960s that the Glen Canyon Dam went online, there's been a lot of prosecutorial thought towards, was that a good idea?
Hmm.
Edward Abbey famously contemplated blowing it up.
Hmm.
Various secretaries of the Interior under Democratic administrations have mused about potential opening up of those gates, of rethinking Lake Powell. These are all a part of the adaptability strategies when it comes to recharging basins that are downriver.
Right. And the results have been extraordinary, as you also point out. Moving water 300 miles across the desert to make the agriculture that we have functional, and the commitment and Senator Hayden's commitment to getting that done at the federal level, supporting the Arizona we know today. It's remarkable. I mean, these are masterpieces of engineering, but as I think you also point out, there's a point at which they have to be reassessed. I'm not sure about blowing up dams, but I know what you mean in terms of people wanting to remove them. Will we have to engineer ourselves out of this situation that we engineered ourselves into? Or when you hear things like green infrastructure or different ways of managing the environment, are you sympathetic to those ways of rethinking what infrastructure actually means?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Hmm.
Not to place too much messianic hope in technology, and certainly not to make an all-in bet, for example, on solar. But
Hmm.
there's tens of thousands of things that we can do, small adjustments here and there. We will find a way. The
Hmm.
Southwest is not going to become a, a baked hellscape of
Right.
abandonment.
And you mentioned that in your editorial, and you also say, by the way, if you had your choice to try to work yourself out of our situation around water, around heat, and a variety of things, or those who are lying in coastal areas, where in Louisiana, part of the Tenor Cross project, where they've lost 2,000 square miles of land and are going to lose another 2,000. Now there's a challenge, and that's going to be real hard to work your way out of. In fact, our problems seem relatively straightforward when compared to those.
Yes, the seawall problem is that's a Manhattan project to
Hmm.
preserve some of those low-lying areas.
Hmm.
This is not a commercial for Southwest real estate, God knows, but we're a much safer bet for buying in the long term than those low-lying littoral areas.
Hmm.
And it sounds like a lazy cliche to say so, but we're going to rely more and more and more on air conditioning.
Hmm. Hmm. Which, of course, means energy and a variety of other things. Um, you use a term in the book, booster aggression, which I hadn't heard before. And I think what you mean is the selling of this place because of air conditioning, but great weather here. Yes, we really do have the water and other things. This place has been built upon a little about what you're mentioning now. We'll work our way through this. We're smart enough to understand that it is a desert now, and you believe that we're going to respond to this more appropriately in the future.
Yeah, I mean, this sense of hope, bordering on the irrational, has always been a part of the Arizona character. The state
Hmm.
itself takes its name from a mineral strike in 1736 that was there and gone within weeks. But yet it took on this name, which in Basque means place of the good oak tree. That was the ranch
Hmm.
in present day Sonora where this mineral strike was found, and it was a cheerful advertising slogan that was picked as a name by a mining entrepreneur, himself a tremendous fabulist by the name of Charles Poston. We
Hmm.
call him the father of Arizona. and a little bit of that huckster spirit remains. And actually, a lot of that huckster spirit, the selling of what, by any objective measure, is, not the easiest place to live.
Mhm.
So when it comes to my faith in, that technology is going to get us through that, I mean, hopefully this is not pulling another, you know, buy desert land at rock bottom prices. It's going to be fabulous. That sort of great real estate lie.
Mhm.
I hope there is some genuine pragmatism towards
Mhm.
looking at a combination of atmospheric energy and
Mhm.
hydrological solutions.
So that's the hardscape, if you will, the landscape of Arizona and the water and other issues that are affiliated with it. We touched on earlier the socioeconomic issues, and obviously we're on the border. And your hike across Arizona took you eventually to the border. And you described in extraordinary detail what it means to be someone trying to cross the desert, trying to get to the border, the impact, the loss of life, and literally, you just mentioned it a second ago, what happens to you when you're out in that heat and probably lacking for water. Um, Such an enormous challenge and an incredible tragedy. How do you see that sorting out, given what we touched on earlier with regard to the politics of the place?
People will always be attempting to enter the United States and work to support their families. This is a social factor that has been with us for decades and decades.
Mhm.
The federal government made it far more of a dangerous crossing in the 1990s when it chose to devote resources toward armoring up ports of entry in El Paso, in San Diego. They weren't wrong to do this, but it did force border crossers and their coyotes to into the desert, which was seen by federal officials as a natural deterrent. It's not a natural deterrent. People will continue to cross. People will continue to die. I think the record shows that the economic contribution made by migrants far outweighs the social costs. This is not to scoff at the genuine problem at the border. I'm really surprised that people of both parties have not devoted proper energies to building a system of asylum courts towards processing these claims to make it faster, to mean what they say in the
Mhm.
Republican Party that we want legal immigration. Well, do you? It doesn't appear that you really do.
I was about to ask you that, and how this argument is devolving to the states. We see what's going on in Texas. We have an Arizona Invasion Act on the table here. And it is unclear whether people really do want to solve the problem. I think everybody wants to avoid the tragedy, of course, but the problem is useful for political reasons, I think. That's fair to say. And thus the slow roll in getting it resolved. Is that fair?
Yeah, and when we say problem, that shouldn't uh, shouldn't be used as a cover-all term
Hmm.
to describe what has largely been a beneficial economic force.
Hmm.
Talk to some of the growers down near Yuma and see who wants
Right.
to go
Right.
pick lettuce for that level of wage that's going to keep the salad cheap.
Right. Um, One other constituency that you talk about in your book are, of course, the original inhabitants and the various conflicts that we've had and how things came to be the way they are. And at one point in the book, you describe the rewriting of history around various unfortunate situations. And as someone who is a journalist, a historian in a way, when you see narratives that conform to the way people would like to imagine certain things played out versus what you know about how they really did, what do you make about of that?
Oddly enough, you look at the lightning speed at which some of the Phoenix suburbs were built and continue to be built. You know, the endless march of red tile roofs out into the
Hmm.
desert. It seems
Hmm.
fast and chaotic. Fast and chaotic also describes 19th century settlement of Arizona, the so-called Indian Wars
Hmm.
that brought Geronimo to heel, that created some of the miseries of the reservation system. That was also reckless,
Hmm.
often done thoughtlessly, often done without regard for those most affected, without an eye towards the future. And we've got uh, more than 2 dozen really complex, really interesting cultures with distinct languages, distinct foodways, distinct cosmologies. We still don't fully know the original inhabitants of this area, and there remains a kind of uh, a cold peace.
Hmm. Um, you mentioned when we first got on the air uh, that you've actually experienced a part of that culture in its contemporary presentation. Do you want to mention how you spent the last 48 hours?
Yes, I'm. If I look a little haggard on the video, I just finished a 48-hour gumball rally, you might call it, of visiting all 26 Arizona Indian casinos in a 48-hour period. We started me and a friend, a Phoenix attorney, started the clock at Fort McDowell, which is where Indian gaming began in Arizona, as it happens, at 8:51 a.m. on a Friday, and from there we got in the car and roared down the beeline and down the 101 to Talking Stick, to Casino Arizona, to the Gila River casinos, Ak-Chin in Maricopa, the Tohono O'odham casinos in Tucson, the Pasquayaki. You're really getting the travelogue here. Uh, the slot parlor in Arizona. Uh, 2 casinos in Yuma. We got 3 hours sleep in Parker at the Blue Water Casino, run by the Colorado River Indian tribes. I'll stop this right now because I just wanted to give a little bit of a panorama of Arizona Indian gaming and how, in some ways, monotonous it can be.
Right.
Casinos all look alike; they sound alike to some degree. They smell alike. And the irony is, I mean, they're run by these very diverse groups of people, tribes, and it's also a mixed bag.
Hmm.
There are absolutely some positive effects of Indian gaming, the jobs, the revenue to the governments, the improvements to the infrastructure. It does bring people out to reservations who
Hmm.
probably should go out to reservations and
Hmm.
at least have glancing contact with the state's original inhabitants. There are undeniable negatives to casino gaming, and you get that visceral, depressing picture when you see people staggering around like zombies at 11 p.m. on a Saturday, just glassy eyed from staring into a slot machine screen, and God only knows how much money they've lost.
So this seems to be your MO in a way, to map out a journey, whether it's a series of casinos, whether it's to hike across the state of Arizona. And you have a chapter in your book on the I-10. And of course, the 10 Across project is built on the idea that if you closely examine the 10 from California to Jacksonville, you see the future of the country. You're focused on a particular component of it from Phoenix to Tucson, but you take these journeys, and what they seem to reveal to you is a fair amount of interesting banality, if that's possible, the normative situation of places, why this landscape is particularly American on the 10, even in all its disheveledness. Tell us about your desire to sort of report by taking a trip, whether you're on foot or in the car or going to casino to casino. How does that help you lay out a narrative?
Sure. Well, Arizona as a state was born on the road. Our first governor was sworn in at a place called Navajo Springs, right over the New Mexico border on their journey towards the first capital, Fort Whipple. on December 29th, 1863. And then the very next day, they loaded up the wagons and they were gone. So it was the railroad has played a tremendous role in shaping Arizona. The Beale Wagon Road. We're a state on the move. Transportation is written into our character. You mentioned Interstate 10. I grew up in both Phoenix and Tucson, and have traveled Arizona's most well-trafficked section of rural interstate at least 500, 700 times. The stretch of I-10 between Phoenix and Tucson, tens of thousands of cars every single day. It is, I think, Arizona's least loved road. It doesn't showcase classic beauty. It's hard bitten. It's dry. Some of the towns along the stretch are really hard used. Not a lot of economic activity, even that you can peel away from the road. There's a dead strip mall that looks terrible outside Casa Grande. And I wanted to look deeper at it. The essay is called The Love Song of Interstate 10, because if you stop and pay attention, I mean, you still might not ever want to, celebrate what you see there.
Right.
But you might appreciate it a little bit more, and you might see it as part of a bigger picture of who we are as Arizonans.
I think that's exactly what motivated us to pick up the 10 as a framework for exploring the country. And a lot of it is much as you described. And I want to conclude by saying your book is fantastic, and with a multitude of literary references and people grappling with how to describe this place, either in all its glory, like the Grand Canyon, or on the section of I-10, which is certainly not that. And you mentioned Barbara Kingsolver in one of her books, for example, suggesting, why would anybody come here? Why would people come to Phoenix? Which was essentially a question we asked in a podcast 2 weeks ago. So in conclusion, I think you would say, I'm still trying to understand this place. I can't give you a definitive answer to that, but there's something going on here. How would you characterize this place and why it's so fascinating to you, even when it doesn't reveal everything about itself in the way that we might conveniently want it to?
Yeah, I mean, love is complicated.
You say that in the book.
Yeah, yeah. I think, as is sometimes said about romantic partners, the thing that first attracted you to them is the thing that drives you absolutely crazy in the end, once you get to know them a little bit. And so there's wonderful romantic inducements about Arizona. There's something that speaks to new frontiers, to individualism, to the promise of a new start, what Wallace Stegner called the geography of hope. The sunsets are gorgeous. The geology is matchless. Tremendous fundamental assets,
Right.
but tremendous difficulties as well. And maybe it's that oscillation in between high purpose and occasionally grim reality that keeps us coming back. The same way that the best Shakespeare plays aren't exactly happy ones.
Which is reality everywhere. I just think it's in its highest relief here, and it brings things like geology and the passage of time, and then the immediacy. I think you're in a restaurant one time saying, I'm enjoying this restaurant because it lets me know that the built environment can sort of anchor you, even if it's just for a little bit. So I think all these things are in your book. I want to recommend it to our audience, Rim to River, looking into the heart of Arizona. I think it's a spectacular meditation on a place that is still in a state of becoming that we're all trying to figure out. So Tom, thank you so much for your great writing and for sharing your thoughts today.
Thank you, Duke. Really enjoyed it.